Hey there, it is Mark, just sliding this in from the laundry room. Some exciting news is we had our baby. She is doing great. She's healthy. My wife also healthy. Everyone's doing great. Everything just fine. Some bad news is apparently it's pretty hard to, have more than one kid. So we're figuring out the rhythms. The podcast has been a little bit quiet lately, but don't you worry, I'm working on that. I've been sitting on these two episodes with Nate McKeever, and these are now rolling out. So I made the decision, though, to cut this first one to half. It's going to be a two-parter. It wasn't recorded like that, but, it's a bit beefier episode, so, we're making the most of it. So part one be going out this week, part two coming out next week, and just, yeah, thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Howdy, folks. I'm Mark, and today I am joined by Nate McKeever of the Backlog Breakdown. Nate, thank you for joining me for this short talk about video games.
You say that, Mark, but every time we've been on together, I manage to come in and just upend your timetable. But we will endeavor to be not so bad at brevity.
Doing our best today. I mean, in a normal episode, we've at least kept it under an hour, and that's what we're going for here.
Those are rookie numbers when it comes to breakdown recordings.
Exactly.
Sometimes that's the preamble.
Your smaller episodes end up going multiple hours somehow.
Oh, dude, that recent the Brain Trust one.
The Brain Trust.
I was like, oh my goodness! Like when I saw the final recording time, I was like, whoa. I mean, it was a good conversation. I love Micah. I love Parker. Like, I love having a conversation with those guys. You probably, dude, I gotta connect you to those two behind the scenes, because I think you'd enjoy them. Yeah. Anyways.
Yes.
Yeah. That one got away from me real quick.
I don't know. I just blacked out, and it was 2 hours later.
It's like 2 hours. Well, and that's like, and that was free feed stuff, because there was probably another half hour, 45 minutes for Patreon uncut access. Yeah. So
good stuff. Well, all of that's out there on the Backlog Breakdown. Yeah. Go check that out. But for now, you listen to Quick Play. So let's get right into it. Nate, you texted me a little earlier with a little take on Nintendo. What's on your mind there?
Well, okay. So to be fair, I don't think that this is a problem that's exclusive to Nintendo. I just think that Nintendo probably has the sort of the biggest stakes in this arena. And it's the sort of, I think the way that you titled it is the dark side of innovation, but and I don't know if there's really a dark side, but it's like sort of like, it is like the other side of that coin. Okay. And so we all know Nintendo, and for years, I think probably the words we would have used are gimmicky. And that's fine up until it isn't. So I've been thinking, like, the 3DS just sort of closed down not too long ago. The Wii U store closed down not too long ago. And there's a lot of like really great games now. And to be fair, they have brought some of that stuff forward. But there's a lot of really great games on the 3DS that, due to the nature of that hardware, will never really be able to come forward without sort of another iteration of the 3DS or DS family, because of the way that those two screens work together. In some ways, like you're never, like, some of that software is just, it's abandoned. Like
landlocked to the 3DS,
yeah, it's sort of stranded there, and it's really a shame. And again, to be fair, it's not just the 3DS. It's like there's stuff that's locked to the Wii or the Wii U that, like, one of my favorite games of all time, Wind Waker. There's an HD port of that on the Wii U, but that's not going to be as simple. Just like sort of like scoop it up and like slap it on the Switch,
right?
Because of the functionality, like how it used the gamepad and everything else. And I'm not saying that it's like, but that version of the game is gone. Like it's done outside of, and so there's kind of this question. And again, Nintendo is probably the biggest offender, and that's maybe true, but I think sometimes, and Sony has done this. I mean, the Vita, like with the weird touchpad on the back, like there's like 3 games that use that, and they're really interesting. Like the original Gravity Rush is a PSP or a Vita game that
Hmm.
uses that touchscreen stuff to sort of as part of interacting with it. But there is a version of the game that's available on PS4, but like the like the original vision is stranded on Vita, and it's, or even like the touchpad on the PlayStation 4 and the DualSense
Oh yeah.
controllers. It's like,
Right.
and there's you either, and so the thing is, like, Sony on one hand has said, hey, we have this touchpad on the PS4 that's not really useful for anything, but it's probably going to be here forever because we we used it here and we used it on some of our other games. And I guess, so all that being said, and the
Yeah.
TLDR of all of this is that it makes me wonder, like, I think those things are really great. I love the DS line.
Yeah.
Full disclosure, I had the old Space Tank DS. I had
Okay.
a
Nice.
DS Lite when they did those. I bought a DSi, and actually I traded in my DS Lite for the DSi, and I couldn't regret
Oh
anything
man.
more.
Lost that Game Boy Advance functionality.
The worst. Now, I had, at the time, to be fair, I had a working GBA-SP. I still have a working
Oh, nice.
GBA-SP.
Cool.
So uh,
There you go.
the battery's garbage on it. But it makes me wonder about these things. Like, at what point in
Mhm.
time now, and granted, there's like the transitory nature of software, right? Like, none of this,
Yeah.
like most video games, if we're being honest, in 100 years, we're not going to be talking about, or our kids aren't going to be talking about, we aren't
Right.
going to be
Yes.
talking about anything, at least on this side of the
Yeah.
veil. Um, but like, so it just, anyways, all of that being said, like, do like do you think it's always worth the bite? I mean, there's a part of me that's like,
Hmm.
yeah, but it's like, and like I said, you either sort of fall into that Sony thing where it's like, okay, well, we're just going to do this, into perpetuity,
Yeah. To the end of
or
time.
you're going to do like the Nintendo thing where it's like, nope, hard stop here, reboot, wild shenanigans, hard stop, reboot,
Yeah.
and so yeah, that's kind of like the idea here, where it's like, I don't necessarily see it as a problem per se, but it does kind of, it makes games preservation, like, the particular difficulty is like games preservation stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so there's not really a
Yeah.
question in there. There's just
A thesis.
a
Uh,
thoughts.
There you go. So after you texted that, I was thinking about it, and I think I've got some pushback, but
Okay.
I think it's a founded fear. Like, it's not especially as we're imminently coming up on the Switch 2, and also looking back of like with the Wii U and 3DS eShops closing down like a couple of years ago,
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of this stuff is lost, and even that stuff like had DS games on it that you could play. The Wii U, you could buy DS games on Virtual Console,
Mm-hmm.
and like that had a built-in way where you could these games were not lost, but now they just kind of are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of still remains to be seen. Will the Switch or Switch 2 bring that back in some way? I kind of think they probably will. Not without work. Like, there still is, these games are kind of stranded for now. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like Nintendo is definitely a step behind the competition. And partly because like Xbox and PlayStation kind of accidentally made it easy for them to just have long-term games just be available.
Well, they found that, and I think like that's the other thing, is that Xbox and PlayStation found their form factors early on, whereas
Mm-hmm.
like Nintendo's, I think, and this is just part of my theories, I think moving forward there will always be like, now it's Nintendo, so they could be just do
Right.
something insane, but I
And that's
think
what the fear is like they could just ignore it and just keep doing what they're doing. But
um but I think like in some ways it'll always be iterative. Now Nintendo also
mhm.
has a philosophy, and we referenced that state of that bite-sized brain trust episode thing I did, and Parker mentioned
Yeah.
something, and I forget, he couldn't remember the name of the philosophy. I went and looked it up, and then I promptly forgot what it was called. But where
Talking
Nintendo,
the blue ocean philosophy?
n- not
Was that
Blue
something?
Ocean,
Okay.
because that has more about like their presence, but it's the way that they utilize technology, where they take like a mature technology, and instead
Yes.
of sort of just like upping the stakes by adding more juice, what they do is they see how they can sort of explore that technology instead of going like horizontal, like and just turning the juice
Okay.
up. They see like,
Yeah.
how can we go horizontal or vertical? Yes, words.
Right.
Um, how can we go sort of like horizontal with this, or how can we sort of like really crack this thing open,
Yeah.
and really utilize everything that's here?
Yeah.
Um, and that's been sort of like one of like the key design philosophies sort of driving Nintendo hardware for years. And so, and it always produces like interesting wrinkles. Like they always do
Yeah.
something interesting with it. So I have no doubt there will be some cleverness in there, but it's like,
Right.
I think there will always, I think now that they've found the Switch form factor, unless something radical happens to the market, I think that in some ways, most Nintendo hardware, if not all Nintendo hardware going forward, will be somewhat iterative.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
also think that because of the way that the market works now, and especially since we are moving into a much more digital sort of structure, a lot of that stuff is like there's going to be a baseline. Like, you know, one of the things Josh and I were talking about a little bit is like PS4 is pretty much going to be, I think, the baseline. Like, and
Right.
everything from PS4 moving forward is going to work on a PlayStation machine. Again, like
Yeah.
that's barring, you know, something wild happen. Like these
Right.
companies can
Sure.
do whatever, but
Yeah.
like Xbox established that, like,
Hmm.
and they like, as long as I think they make hardware, like it'll just, and so I think
Right.
that they're all kind of moving in this direction, but, Nintendo got a Nintendo. Um,
Right.
so
And I think to give like a defense for Nintendo from early on, it was like because that whole digital storefront is relatively recent, like
mhm,
within the last 10 years,
yeah,
like they never had to consider that. Like that was
no,
maybe not a future thinking, future proofing that they could have done, but it was like you went from Super Nintendo to N64, it's a new thing, you buy new games. Why
mhm,
would your SNES games work on the N64? That's dumb. It's just keep your old SNES.
yeah, yeah,
And now, but it's like with that PS4 being the baseline, well, theoretically that should have been the Wii U is the Nintendo's baseline, and a lot of that has been like stuck on Wii U, or they packaged them up, repackaged them, and resold them to you on Switch. But Nintendo Land is kind of just like maybe lost forever, which is also kind of like this. Is Nintendo Land that beloved? Like it's beloved to me. I had great times on my college dorm playing Nintendo Land. That's the other aspect is like there's this whole stat of something like 80 something games are not available on modern hardware. And it's like that's staggering, and it's like, man, we gotta like save game preservation. We gotta to save all these games and get them playable. It's like, well, maybe 70 something percent of the games like probably aren't worth it. And so
that's, yeah, that is, I think that's the thing is like, you know, if like 80 some percent of the games aren't playable on modern hardware,
it's like, how
let's
many of
be
those suck?
honest, how many of those are just like, I mean, maybe better than ET, but not by much. Like,
Right. Yeah.
so
And like and someone's effort into that. Like there's an argument for it, but it's like it's not. I don't know. I think there's is I think about a lot of the Nintendo games that are worth preserving, like have been preserved. It's like we can,
as,
and some of
as a,
them are stuck, but
as a general rule, I would agree, but I think there is this kind of like, it sucks because there's some really great stuff
sure,
that
yes,
even if you find a way to bring it forward, you're still going to lose some of that. And it's kind of like, I guess, yeah, it is the dark side of innovation where it's like, sometimes it's like, is the juice always worth that squeeze? And you're right. Like,
sure,
I'm sure that even sort of like going just back to like the DS era, they weren't thinking about like future proofing this stuff, you know,
right,
like saying like, hey, people are going to want to play these games for the next 30 years. Um, but it is kind of one of those things. And so it's kind of, I just have to like wrestle with like, was that innovation worth it? And because like, that's the other thing, a
mm,
lot of the technologies that they introduced, like some of them, like the motion control and the haptics, and some of
Right.
the more subtle stuff, like, yeah, that's really impactful. But like, was it necessary to put two screens on the DS? Like, and then I don't know. It's just one of those things where, like I said, it kind of sucks because, um, especially like, well, and that's the other thing is like, have you ever played? There was a game for the DS called The World Ends With You.
I know of it. I've not actually played it, but
Okay,
yeah.
and there's a version of it available on Switch, and I think like most phones, that
Oh,
kind of
okay.
utilizes some of the touchscreen stuff. But I remember that game, and what was really wild about it is that you would use, like, I think the D-pad for, um, like basically controlling a character on the top screen, and then you
Right.
would use the stylus for controlling a character on the bottom screen. And there was kind of this weird rhythm state, like almost like flow state that you would get into, like,
Yeah.
or I would get into but
Sure.
it's like, and that was really kind of just out there. And it was like one of my favorite games for a long, long time. I still really think it's pretty, I don't think it has age. It's like most of my favorite things, like, eventually, like if it's not Shadow of the Colossus or like Chrono Trigger,
No.
eventually I'm just like, well, it's not that good. Um, you know, um, but there were really sort of like interesting takes on that, and that stuff unfortunately is just kind of gone. Now I think it's doable, like, but again, it's, yeah.
But that was also they've like re-released it for Switch and like reconfigured the controls, and I feel like I heard that was not taken like with glowing reviews.
It's
Like it's
not
kind of
as,
like this is a yeah.
it's basically the iPhone and Android port, for the Switch,
Okay.
and it's fine, but it's not nearly as, it's not as good. But that's, I guess that's kind of what I'm talking about, is like, there was a part where we really did love Nintendo. Like, and I still like love Nintendo. I love to bag on them too. Um, yeah, because I think they're kind of crazy. And
That's also why
um,
we love them.
but that's, yeah, that is why
Yeah.
we love them. But I think it's just kind of an interesting thing, is like, was all that innovation worth it? And in some ways, yeah, but in other ways, like, yeah.
And that is a good place to it to, chop it in half. That's the end of part one. Part two coming out next week. So thanks for listening. Thank you again, Nate McKeever, for joining me. You can find him on the backlog breakdown. Listen to them on, any podcast place, up on YouTube, and you can follow Nate at Nate_McKeever at most social medias. You can also find us, Quick Play. Keep listening, keep watching. Find us at Quick Play Pod. And yeah, let us know what you think. Talk to you soon. Bye.